Thank you all. Thanks, Don. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, just picking up on a point that Nigel made, we are working with animals. We're dealing with biological processes. It's not a precise science, and in trying to deal with that, manage risk and manage good animal welfare outcomes, we can't expect 100% compliance or accuracy at every turn. What we're about is managing risk, and that's what this process is about. LGAP is seeking to provide the same assurances that are currently provided through SCAS, which is a regulatory program or regulatory framework, but through a conformity assessment program. So I'll discuss, basically give you some background to the project and the development process. This is R&D, this is not implementation. I'll talk about the program owner, as well as give an overview of the comparison between LGAP and SCAS. Talk about the components of the program, feedback from in-market consultation, and the next steps in the program. So if we just cast our minds back to why we are actually discussing this. In May of 2011, a bloody business appeared on Four Corners, and that resulted a few days later in a suspension of the trade to Indonesia. SCAS came about within 6 weeks. It was developed and implemented within 6 weeks to achieve a specific purpose, and that was to recommence the trade in cattle to Indonesia. Following the implementation of SCAS, there was the farmer review, which Bill Farmer went around and observed the live export industry in all our markets and made recommendations. One of those recommendations was that the live export industry pursue or investigate the application of a QA program to address the risks and the issues which SCAS sought to address. Research was undertaken, and in 2013 a recommendation went to ALIC that in fact an assurance program could help or assist in managing risk, and on that basis ALIC made the decision to actually pursue that recommendation. So as a consequence, the project which we are working on is seeking to develop a program which is a conformity assessment program in animal welfare and management. This builds upon the preliminary research. The ultimate outcome will be a fully piloted, ready to implement program. But we are not charged with implementing this. Industry will ultimately make a decision about implementation. The project is funded by MLA, LiveCorp and the Australian Federal Government. Again, this is R&D, not implementation. The project that we are working on commenced in July 2014 and will ultimately come to a head toward the end of this year, early next year. It is being driven by a consultative committee which is made up of 15 representatives. 6 of those are live exporters. We also have animal welfare representative from the Australian Veterinary Association, as well as 2 Department of Agriculture representatives and representatives from the project sponsors. The government representation is critical. There is absolutely no point in developing a program that the government will not acknowledge once the R&D is delivered and if industry decides to implement. This project is independently chaired. Together with this committee, we have been following a consultative process, which I'll just run through briefly. This has included all the Australian live exporters. We've been meeting with them on a one-on-one basis regularly. We are also meeting with the Department of Agriculture, again, to make sure that they know what we're doing and the direction we're taking. We are meeting with and working with the LEP, the MLA, LiveCorp, Live Export Program people in Australia's major markets. We have met with Indonesian representatives, most particularly Afindo in Indonesia, and discussions with Afindo are ongoing. In the Middle East, we have been around 7 of the different countries and met with people within those markets. So they're the importers, the feedlotters, the transport people, and also importantly the abattoirs. We have sat down and had candid discussions about this with the Honourable Barnaby Joyce. We've also met with the RSPCA on numerous occasions, as well as Animals Australia and WAP, or the former WISPA. we are meeting again with other markets in South Asia, Vietnam being the most prominent. Peak industry councils, so Cattle Council of Australia, Sheep Meat Council of Australia, Goat Industry Council of Australia, because obviously producers have a very significant interest in maintaining the live export markets. And the consultative committee, which I mentioned before, has met 10 times since this program began. Considerations that are front and centre in moving this project forward are, of course, ISO and WTO. I won't go into what these mean necessarily. Suffice to say, as Dr. Villatt mentioned this morning, WTO and ISO are very important organisations. They have important requirements when standards are being considered and developed. We are developing a standard, which is basically the requirement under this program, to be consistent with WTO and ISO requirements. And we are in fact basing that on OIE. We are considering international precedents when we talk about animal health, welfare and management. Importantly, as I mentioned, IOE and also the interpretation of OIE. So while OIE presents a guideline as far as animal welfare goes, that is then interpreted through various programs around the world, and we have considered these programs in developing the standard under LGAP. We have also scanned international legal requirements and regulatory requirements so that we have brought those into consideration in developing LGAP. We have also looked at domestic references with respect to animal health, welfare and management, front and centre, of course, being SCAS. This needs to provide the same assurances which are currently being sought through SCAS. But we have also considered other programs, one being RSPCA's approved farming scheme. And I note that Heather is here today, and good to see you and your interest. So the basis for LGAP, what I've just run through, establishes that we have conducted due diligence. We have left nothing to chance. We are not making decisions in considering the standards for LGAP in isolation. Other options, other programs have been researched thoroughly and considered in this program, in this process. So the actual program, the Livestock Global Assurance Program, or LGAP as it's referred to, is being developed to be a conformity assessment program based on international precedents and science. It aims to foster world's best practice in the handling and management of livestock and also recognise strengths and weaknesses. As I mentioned before, Nigel said that we're dealing with animals, we're dealing with biological functions. It is not going to be 100% right all the time. We need a process for continual improvement, and we need to recognise and acknowledge that effort. LGAP will do that. The scope of the program reflects that of SCAS. The terms of reference required us to work within the parameters of SCAS, so that is from the point of disembarkation to the point of slaughter for feeder, livestock, cattle, buffalo, sheep and goats. Under these programs, there is typically, according to WTO and ISO, there is a program owner. Now that program owner administers the standards and rules for the program. In considering who the program owner should be, we considered the outcomes of the preliminary research, and this determined that the owner needs to be at arm's length of industry. It can't be seen to be too close to or influenced by industry. Otherwise, there could be the perception that this is just industry marking its own homework. It also needs to be independent of government. We have seen issues with SCAS that there is the impression or the fact of sovereign imposition. Some markets do not appreciate being told what to do or the perception that they are being told what to do by another government. It obviously needs to be credible and reputable and allow for internationalisation. So these were the findings of the preliminary research. In considering that, what the consultative committee has decided from 6 models that were put forward, there should be a company. This should be a member-based company. It would have a board of directors and then a program integrity or a rules committee to manage how the standards of the program would be implemented. There would also be an operational management unit within that company. So the key components really are the company, the rules and the standards, and then an operational management unit. So how does LGAP differ or replicate what's being achieved through SCAS? Some terminology. This is a certification program. Entities are being certified under this program. Those entities are exporters and importers, and these are classed as operators. There are also feedlots or farms in market and abattoirs. They are facilities under this program. So currently under SCAS, you have the Department of Agriculture who approves an exporter, based on that exporter appointing an auditor who goes out and audits transport, feedlots and farms and abattoirs in Australia's export markets. That auditor then reports back to the exporter, and the exporter uses that audit report to support their application to the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Agriculture approves that their right to export on that basis. Under LGAP, there is an independent program, arm's length of industry, independent of government. LGAP appoints approved certification bodies. So these are certification bodies that can demonstrate the appropriate credentials to provide audit services under the program. Many of the audit companies currently auditing under SCAS would have the credentials to offer services to this program. They would then also have to have approved auditors offering services under the approved certification bodies. The rules of the program will require that those auditors be capable and competent. They will have to be trained, they will have to operate at a particular level and have a minimum amount of training in animal handling and welfare under the program. These auditors will audit the exporters, the importers, as well as the transport, feedlot farms and abattoirs. While this is happening, and in between these independent audits, there will be internal audits, so that this is a process of self-checking and self-verification, so that facilities and operators can make sure that they remain consistent with what is required under certification. So as you can see, when comparing the two, there are some significant differences. Firstly, the Australian government is embedded in the process in SCAS. The Australian government is independent of LGAP. Exporters are not audited, nor are importers under SCAS. They have requirements placed upon them, yes, but they are not independently audited. They are under LGAP. There is no defined process of managing the inter-audit gap. So what happens between third-party audits is not standardised at the moment under SCAS. It would be standardised under LGAP. So moving on to the interaction of regulation, that's all fine, but what's the regulator? What would be the role of the regulator? First and foremost, it's not our place to determine that. That is the regulator's decision, but what we are providing is a pathway, and this is a pathway which has precedence and which is used in other industries, for example, the meat industry. So under this program, under live export at the moment, there is Australian regulation, and that is crudely summarised by the exporters being licensed, complying with ACIL, which is the Australian standard for the export of livestock, and also complying with SCAS. What we are providing is a mechanism for a regulatory enabler to exist that provides the same assurance which is currently being provided through SCAS, but through a different program. At the moment, you have a regulatory framework. This is a conformity assessment program. This is a more normal way of providing assurance. Underpinning LGAP are the standards. This is like the checklist which currently exists under SCAS, and the two are ultimately based on the same thing, and that is what we heard about from Dr. Villatt today. That is the guidance, the animal welfare guidance, which exists under OIE. So the standards are, in fact, the requirements of the program. They follow ISO and WTO, and they are in a format which reflects that which is applied, the same kind of nomenclature which is used under ISO. So some of you may be familiar with ISO 14001 or 9001. We are applying a similar approach through LGAP. This also uses prescribed methods for applying standards and naming the standards. So if we are using in developing standards, there is a prescribed method, and that is to use a standards committee. The LGAP Standards Committee, or ISO, requires that a standards committee have proportional representation of the impacted stakeholders. So these are the people to whom the standards will apply. They are the people who will be required to implement the standards. There is a prescribed need for a public comment period. So this is a minimum of 60 days. What we have done under LGAP is expanded that standards committee to include animal welfare representatives. They are not impacted stakeholders in that they are not required to actually implement the standard. But we realise that that is at the heart of this issue, so we have two representatives that have been brought onto that standards committee. The standards committee had its inaugural meeting on the 19th and 20th of November, so last week, and the next steps are for the public review, finalisation and release of the standards. The standards we have developed, there is a family of standards in keeping with ISO nomenclature. LGAP 1000, Livestock Assurance is how they are named. That is the family of standards. There are 4 standards under LGAP: fundamentals and vocabulary, animal welfare and management, management systems, and then chain of custody. By having a family of standards, we have flexibility. The program can be responsive, it can move, it can adapt and respond to different market drivers. For example, and these are concepts only, these are beyond the scope of the project that we're currently working on, but they are important considerations, and they will ensure that the usefulness and the application of LGAP does not expire quickly. For example, ACIL, one of the recommendations of the Farmer Review was that industry pursue the application of a QA program right back to on-farm. That is beyond the immediate scope of the research which we're undertaking, but the structure which we are applying would allow ACIL to be brought in under the program if and when industry decides to do that. There is also the opportunity to potentially bring breeders in under the program, and perhaps specific market requirements for, say, China or Vietnam or any other market. A module could effectively be brought in under the family. There are immediate drivers in market for food safety, food hygiene. We are hearing this from the consultation that we have been undertaking as part of the program. This program could move to accommodate those drivers. So the public comment period is about to commence. It will be 60 days. The standard and a prescribed method for commenting on the standard will be made available through the website livestockglobalassurance.org. That website is live now. The standard will be put up there shortly for public comment. So the rules, we have the standards of the program. They are the requirements. How they are actually applied is defined in the rules of the program. So the LGAP rules are based again on ISO methodology. They describe and define the responsibilities, interactions and obligations of the program owner, facilities, operators, certification bodies and auditors. So it is through these rules that we can require a minimum level when it comes to auditing. We can require that shadow audits occur. We can require that there be a combination of internal and third-party audits to verify that the standards are being conformed with. We have also, in discussion with the Consultative Committee, moved to accommodate several scopes under the program. So, for example, we are proposing that there be level 1, 2 and 3 under this program, and that level 1 be OIE. Now, SCAS is based on OIE, but there are several requirements over and above OIE and several points in OIE that SCAS remains silent on. There is also the opportunity to implement or introduce a third level, and this is truly best practice. So by having different levels within the program, we have the opportunity to promote continual improvement, present an aspirational pathway, and also the opportunity, as Mr Asaf mentioned before, here we have the opportunity to bring local livestock into the program and encourage the adoption of OIE guidance. Holding all of this together is a central nervous system, a conformance management system or IT system. This is essentially for recording and monitoring and provides real-time visibility into conformance, performance and history. It is not a traceability system, nor is it a supply chain management system. It's a tool to manage internal and external audits as well as the application process, and a tool for managing non-conformities. Basically, it's a reporting tool. It's the backbone of LGAP. So we have, playing a critical role under this, as we saw on the diagrams before, are the certification bodies and the auditors. The way it would all come together is you have the program owner central to the program. They would have approved certification bodies operating to ISO 17065, providing services to the program owner. Under these approved certification bodies are the approved auditors. As I mentioned before, there would be specific requirements placed on the capability and competency of those auditors. A facility or an operator would apply to the program owner to participate in the program, and there would be a commercial transaction at that point. The program owner would charge an approved certification body with auditing that company. That approved certification body would nominate an auditor who would go out, audit that facility, identify non-conformities, correct those non-conformities to the auditor's satisfaction, and then they would make a recommendation back to the approved certification body. The approved certification body would then bestow certification on that facility. Now, there are a couple of key differences here as well. There is no commercial transaction between the facility or the operator and the auditor. This currently does exist under SCAS. Under this proposed program, that would not exist. That nexus would be broken. The only commercial transaction would be between the facility or the operator and the program owner. The program owner would then engage the approved certification body as the service provider. Furthermore, the auditor does not approve or give the exporter an audit report. That is managed through the approved certification body and by the program owner. So that auditor makes a recommendation back to the approved certification body. So in a way, that auditor's homework is then marked by their employer. Non-conformities. Non-conformities identified through both internal audits and external audits are managed within the program. They don't become a function of an interaction between the regulator and the exporter, for example. They're managed within the program. Facilities and operators close out non-conformities through an evidence-based approach. Auditors review the corrective actions which have been undertaken and consider whether it's sufficient. So the rules determine how these non-conformities are going to be managed or how they will be classified. They could either be minor, major or critical. The amount of time required to close them out depends upon their classification. and there's an escalation pathway. So even a minor non-conformity, if it is not closed out, it can be escalated to major, onto critical. If a critical is not closed out within a prescribed time frame, it can result in a suspension of certification, and then if that is not resolved within a prescribed time frame, it can result in a withdrawal of certification from the program. Complaints will be allowed, so complaints can be brought against a particular facility within the program, and this follows a particular ISO prescribed method for management. Complaints are handled in a particular way, but there are also requirements placed upon complainants. So unsubstantiated or nuisance complaints will not be allowed under this program, and there'll be a method for managing those. Qualified and supported complaints will be reviewed and they will be escalated through the prescribed process. Surveillance and risk frequency. So how often will audits actually occur? This will be based upon a risk assessment. External auditors, every time an external auditor goes to a facility or audits an operator, they will undertake a risk assessment of that facility. This considers about 18 variables, whereas the current assigning of a risk rating to an exporter or facilities is based on 3 or 4 variables under SCAS. So it's a more thorough process. It considers the risk of not maintaining conformance. So that ultimately is the risk which is being assessed. The outcome is a risk rating, and auditors, they don't actually determine the risk rating. They respond to a series of questions and an algorithm assigns that risk rating. So again, the auditor can't go in and just say, I think this is a medium or a low risk. They respond to questions and an algorithm generates that rating. So the risk determines the surveillance frequency. You can either be low, medium or high risk. If you are low risk, the internal audit frequency is 4 months. Medium risk, 3 months. High risk, monthly. External audits, annual if you're low risk. If you are medium risk, every 6 months. If you are high risk, you are subject to a 3-monthly external audit regime. In addition, and in a significant departure from SCAS, 10% of certified facilities will also be subject to an annual audit every year. So there is a significant incentive there for continuous improvement to move from a low risk or a high risk rating through to a low risk rating. Now the pilot process, we are piloting this in 4 markets at the moment, that being Australia, Jordan, Indonesia and Malaysia. We are piloting everything, including the conformance management system. Operators, facilities, certification bodies and auditors are participating in this pilot. We will consider the outcomes of the pilot, review the program and ultimately refine that program. Just a few comments. I've mentioned that in-market consultation has been an important part of what we're doing. We have been through the Middle East and South Asia to gain an impression, gain an idea of their experiences with SCAS and what they think about this approach. There is recognition that we are moving toward an ISO framework. SCAS could not consider ISO in its entirety. As I mentioned, it was developed in 6 weeks to address a specific need. This program has had to comply with various ISO requirements. For example, there is a 60-day public advertisement of the standards. SCAS was developed and delivered in 6 weeks. It could not be delivered according to ISO. There is also recognition of the flexibility of this approach. This is not a supply chain approach. This is a facility-based approach. This supports a more normal way of undertaking commerce, a more normal way of doing business, and the markets recognise this. The use of independent, truly independent, highly skilled, highly trained auditors is seen as an advantage to this approach. They don't necessarily see that they're getting value out of the audits, not necessarily at the moment. Under this, they can see that by having truly highly trained, skilled auditors, that's going to add some value rather than just adding cost. Elimination of audit duplication. Audit duplication is significant in many markets. Because this is facility rather than supply chain approach, that audit duplication will be eliminated. Again, the flexibility of the program and the ability to respond to market drivers. There are immediate drivers in some of these markets, for example, food safety, hygiene, and it's recognised in market that this program can respond to those. Furthermore, the independence of this program from Australian government is seen as a major advantage, particularly in markets like Saudi Arabia. There are concerns, and we are not blind to these concerns. We are considering them in the research process. Obviously, cost is an issue. A key outcome of the R&D, which is ongoing, which we are still undertaking, will be a cost. That cost is going to be informed by the pilot process which is underway, but cost is a consideration. The capacity of small operators to be involved in this program is also an area of interest. We are developing this program to be scalable so that size will not necessarily be an issue or a barrier to entry. Support during possible implementation has also been identified as a critical element. There are lessons that were learnt from SCAS, and we need to apply those lessons if this program is implemented. So where to from here? International public comment on the standards will commence shortly. We will finalise the research based on the pilot outcomes. The pilots will conclude in December this year. We will hand over the outcomes of our research to industry, and industry will then make a decision about implementation. So in summary, LGAP is being designed and developed to provide the same assurance that is currently provided under SCAS, but through a different, more normal mechanism. LGAP would become the regulatory enabler. This is not deregulation. And this ultimately is being developed to facilitate the long-term sustainability and continued growth of the live export trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Move to questions, please. A very detailed... Yes, got one. Oh, Dickie, sorry. Yep. Just there's a mic coming behind you, Dickie.
Just my question is that you mentioned that it's independent of government. I find it a bit challenging for us in Indonesia. As you know, at the moment, our government is very nationalistic. As an example, in the palm oil industry, there is an international standard of palm oil, but Indonesia doesn't recognize it. Indonesia has its own ISPO, they call it. Another one, we were banned by FIFA because of a government intervention, and the government still insists that it doesn't matter. So that would be the biggest challenge if you are approaching in Indonesia and tell the government is independent of the government, and they would be asking you, who is your Indonesian in this? They don't want to be seen like regulated without any input from them. That's my input. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Dickie. And thank you for the input that you have had. Indonesia has been a trailblazer for SCAS, and we've learnt a lot through the development of this program through Afindo and our colleagues in Indonesia. This will be independent of government, but it will be recognised by the Australian government. This is what we're proposing, that this be recognised by the Australian government as being a global and international program that provides the same assurances that government currently seeks through SCAS, but through a conformity assessment approach. So the government will look at the audit regime, the competency of auditors, the fact that there are shadow audits, that there is internal auditing, external auditing, and take confidence from that program, from the standards and rules governing that program, that it's providing that same assurance. There would need to be discussions between your government and the Australian government, that is my guess, but there certainly needs to be open dialogue between your industry and our industry so that we can continue the trade. We need to have those discussions, and they need to be ongoing. I think we can resolve this perhaps out of session, but I acknowledge what you're saying. Thank you.